We're proud to welcome back Dr. Gerald Schroeder, our only return speaker. I don't know if we took a vote on it, but I sense that, what?
Pro came twice.
Who?
Pro?
Pro came twice. It wasn't LiveShiur. Hasn't been recorded. So the only returning recorded speaker. I know after he came the first time, a lot of guys had questions. I know we engaged Dr. Schroeder for quite some time. I don't have to reintroduce him. Everyone's familiar with his history. For you, Ariel. Oh, sorry. Okay, so Ariel wasn't here. Dr. Schroeder's that's right. Sure. Okay. So Dr. Schroeder's a world-renowned physicist. He's written multiple books that help resolve many of the issues that people face with Torah and science. He's also obviously Orthodox, which makes him how much of a minority are you? Significant minority?
I hope not.
Okay. So he's going to speak to us today about evolution and other topics, and you'll definitely have time for Q&A, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Without further ado, Dr. Gerald Schroeder.
But coming in, some of the guys are asking about the new discovery that took place last week. I think it was last week or a week before, with the information that seems to nail, if it is correct, if the data are correct, and the scientists have a good reputation for being conservative, and then it nails down the fact, it confirms the fact that there was this phenomenon called inflation that occurred immediately after the creation. It's not the creation of the universe, but it's what happens in a trillionth of a second after the creation, or immediately after the creation, which the universe suddenly undergoes an expansion, hence the name inflation. And it's what allows a tiny universe to become a universe that will have enough stuff in it to allow the world to develop it to the world we see today. So the importance of it is that if it's true, then it's an extremely strong statement in favor of the Torah description of the universe and the creation of the universe. The understanding of how the universe is brought into being from absolute nothing. If you're not going to invoke God, then you have to invoke the laws of nature. Now, would God use the laws of nature to create the universe? Well, you can't tell that from the 31 sentences that make up the creation chapter, Genesis chapter 1. And you started with the creation of the universe, and by verse 26 you got people. So there's almost no information given, no detailed information. But it does tell us that there was a creation which was counter to the understanding of the universe by the scientific society, scientific community, until about 50 years ago, held by the Greek view of the universe. That is the overwhelming majority. There are always scientists on the other side. But the Greek view of the universe was that the universe was eternal, because it must have always been here. And that was the understanding of the scientific community until the late 1960s and early 70s, that the Bible was wrong from the first sentence. The universe is eternal, which is a pretty strong statement against the rest of the Bible if you couldn't get the first sentence right. And then two scientists, one a Jew and one a Christian, Arnold Penzias and Robert Wilson, discovered the echo of the Big Bang. And what was important about their discovery, it's called in research a double-blind experiment. They weren't looking for evidence of the creation of the universe. They weren't even astronomers. They were using an antenna, it's a telescope, but it's more like a big box. It's not looking at light, it's looking at radiations that are not in the green region that we see. And they kept finding this noise, this static. And it turned out that they didn't know what they found, because they were doing satellite work. They were using Bell Labs in New Jersey. And they were working for Bell Labs, completely oblivious to cosmology, completely into the whole idea of how sensitive can a satellite be to pick up the information. They kept getting this noise ground, and they finally, they thought it was the pigeons that had come inside the telescope. They got rid of the pigeons. Then they thought it was the guano. They got, the droppings. They got rid of the droppings. Then the pigeons came back. They got rid of the. You read the story. It's pretty interesting. The noise wouldn't go away, and it didn't matter what season of the year, where they looked in the sky. And it turned out another group of scientists that were cosmologists, astronomers, at Princeton University were looking for the same thing, but Penzias and Wilson and Bell Labs didn't know about it, but they knew these people worked with data from space also. And they called up and they had the conversation. They discovered that what they had discovered was the echo of the Big Bang, the radiation left over of the Big Bang. But to get that to work, so this is the creation of the universe, but then how do you create the universe? So in 1973, a scientist by the name of Ed Tryon, Tryon, published in the journal Nature. Now, any of you guys that have to take AP in science, you know that Nature is one of the 2 leading peer-reviewed journals in the world, peer-reviewed science journal. Like a journal like Scientific American published, it's not peer-reviewed, right? They all get published if it fits the editor's view of the world, which is a very secular view of the world. To position Scientific American, for example, they have a paid column every month by Mike Schwimmer, Jewish needless to say, who is the founder of the Skeptic Society. It takes a Jew to find that one, right? Whose job is to write every month an article which essentially shoots down metaphysical reality and keeps the world materialist. So that positions their understanding. Whereas in journal Nature and the journal Science, the 2 major science journals are peer-reviewed, the articles have to pass peer review. Even so, the editor has a strong, the chief editor can skew articles which are published. They're not. Even if they pass peer review, the chief editor can reject them. But in any event, Ed Tryon in 1973 published an article showing that you could create the universe from absolute nothing, provided you had the laws of nature. In other words, it's the laws of nature. Now, I don't know if we did this the last time, or did we discuss this the last time? If anybody remember?
We did.
We did?
Mm-hmm.
So then maybe we'll just skip it altogether.
Well, then maybe some chazara.
Okay.
Do you guys remember?
No.
All right.
Somebody that studies and doesn't repeat it is like someone who sowed seeds but never harvests the crop. Okay, so what Tryon pointed out, that a combination of quantum mechanics and relativity can produce a universe from nothing, provided you've got quantum mechanics and the laws of nature. But now if you think about that, if these forces, I just call them the forces of nature, if the forces of nature create the universe from absolute nothing, and if our understanding of time begins with the universe, then guess what? The laws of nature have to predate the universe. Okay, so laws of nature predate the universe. Now it starts getting dicey, because if the laws of nature predate the universe, that means they predate our understanding of time. You know, it's kind of like a difficult statement to say, because how do you predate time if there's no time? But there may be aspects of time that are not as we understand it. Anyway, if the laws of nature create the universe, they predate our understanding of time, which means the laws of nature are outside of what we understand to be time. And the laws of nature aren't physical. The laws of nature act on the physical. Okay? And the laws of nature can create the universe from absolute nothing, which of course, if you put those all thoughts together, you've got the biblical God. Right? Outside of time, not physical, but can interact with the physical, and are able to create the universe from absolute nothing. So God uses, we see consistently, if God invents the laws of nature, God might as well use them. Is it logical that He'll use the laws of nature to create the universe? Is it logical that God would use the wind to split the sea? I mean, that's the best parallel I can think. Exodus 4, chapter 14, verse 21. How does the sea split? Not by some phenomenal, overwhelming thing. God brings a wind, says point blank. God made a strong east wind blow all night. So God, consistently, the biblical God uses the laws of nature to get things done. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim says that's what are angels, that God's working through the laws of nature to get things done, using the laws of nature. It's the Rambam. It's the second part, chapter 6, I think it is. Anyway, so here we have this idea of the laws of nature to create the universe. We have the biblical God, and that's essentially this diagram that I show each time, because it doesn't change year after year. It's just gets more and more confirmed that we have the laws of nature here, quantum fluctuation. This is absolute nothing. Atoms are here. Torah says this is God. Science says we don't know what that is. It's nothing. Nothing doesn't fit into our heads. Nothing isn't empty space. Empty space is something. It's space. Nothing is not space. It's not matter. It's important to realize that every human being in the world, clever or dumb, fast or slow, thinks in the same box. We all think of the same box. The box is time, space, and then stuff, energy or matter. That's the physical box. No one thinks out of that box. Because no one has a thought that's outside of the box. You can say metaphysical, but you can't conceive of metaphysical. You can't put it in. Every thought you have is made up of these parameters. So we talk about these forces being outside of time and space. It's something that doesn't fit in here. With nothing, that's what this would be. All the others, the time, space, and matter, are inside here. So we have essentially the description of the biblical God. And the biblical God, well, it's 80% or 75% of the biblical God. And it sounds strange, but I say that each time now when I'm talking about this, I say one of the nice things about having a book on the bestseller list for a lot of time is when you email other people that have had books on the bestseller list, you know what they do? They answer you. They don't just dump your email into the garbage. So there are scientists like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins and Stephen Weinberg will say, if you want to call that God, it's this description outside of time, not just a force, not physical, creates the universe for nothing. If you want to call that God, call it God. But it wouldn't be the God of the scientists, per se, which will accept it as being God. Except it's not the God of the Bible. It's a deist God. It's a God that winds up the universe, gets it running and steps back and goes for lunch or something and lets it run by itself. Whereas the biblical God is active in the world. So this discovery, which seems to nail into the fact that inflation occurred, because notice what happens here at the creation of the universe, and then the very next act is inflation. This force that takes to create a universe from nothing, the creation has to be minuscule on minuscule, like an atom or probably less than the size of an atom. The larger something is, the less likely it can be created from nothing. If you get to the size of a grain of sand, you're sure it can't happen. You get to an atom, atom, it's difficult but possible. The smaller it is, but you start with a universe, and that's the only physical creation, according to the Ramban, and according to science also. There's only one physical creation. Then you got to get something to make it happen. And that's what's called inflation. So what's interesting, at least partly interesting, in Genesis and the Big Bang, my first book, I talk about this a bit, and I say it's intriguing. We're just talking about this outside there for a moment. It's intriguing that there's a sentence in sentence number 2 of the Bible. The first sentence is an overall statement. God creates the heavens and the earth. The system is programmed now. It can move forward. Tohu v'bohu. Tohu is a chaos, and bohu, there is the potential in it. Bohu, there is in it. The potential is there, has to spin out. And then comes this amazing statement, Ruach Elohim Merachefet. Ruach Elohim Merachefet appears, that phrase is a one-time force in the entire Tanakh. It never appears again. The Spirit of God hovering. Merachefet appears only one other place in Deuteronomy, like an eagle above its nest. Where it hovers above its nest, it teaches the young ones how to fly. So that phrase, the Spirit of God hovering, Ruach Elohim Merachefet, appears nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible. Inflation appears nowhere else in the history of the universe. And they both happen at the same time. The Spirit of God hovering happens immediately after the first sentence number 2, it can't be any earlier than that. And inflation happens immediately after this creation. And then the universe expands out, and then it just keeps on coasting after that. Expands out by a large amount, but it starts so small, it ends up, as I say, small, somewhere between a marble and a grapefruit. That's the size. But that's everything. Highly dense, goes out. What's interesting is if there's only one physical creation, and that's the beat that gets it from nothing into this subatomic particle. This inflation is not creation, that's after creation. But it's only physical creation, so how does the universe get from here up to here? And it's not my field. My background is nuclear physics. It is not cosmology, so I'm just blabbing back the in the literature. In that expansion, the universe makes itself. Normally, if you start with something and you expand it, the temperature goes down, it becomes more dilute. That's why you go to you stand at the bottom of Kilimanjaro, it's 100 degrees in the shade, and what do you got on the top of the mountain? Ice and snow. Because this hot air, as it rises up the mountain, expands and expands, so the given amount of heat that's in here is now in this volume. So obviously it gets so cold, that's what makes it, That's what makes it cold on the top of the mountain, the expansion. So you expect this a dilution as the universe expands from the speck of less than an atom to this, let's say, size of a grapefruit, something in a golf ball grapefruit, something like that. But the amazing thing is it doesn't become diluted. It makes itself. It makes itself. Now, that's rather bizarre, but that's what happens. Interestingly, perhaps, maybe boring, but to me it's interesting. The Ramban, Nachmanides, about the year 1250, is discussing the Zer HaZahav, the gold crown on the table, the Shulchan, right? See, there are 5 listings of the kelim, of the items that are in the Shulchan. So 5 times. Always the first one is the Aron HaKodesh. You know, obviously the Ark of the Covenant. You don't have that. You have nothing to go by in the first place. But the second one is always the table. Some of the others change order. What goes on the table?
Bread.
Nope. What? Bread. It's a symbol of abundance in the world. And the table has a Zer Zahav, a gold rim or a gold crown. And the Aron HaKodesh has a Zer Zahav, a gold crown. And the spice salt has a Zer Zahav. Only the Zer Zahav on the table is called a Masgeret, from like a framework, from Suger. Like it's focused to something. And on those 2 words, the Ramban, Nachmanides, says a phrase that you hear even in the news today. A secular, I don't think he's saying secular, but you know, not the religious news. Ha'olam k'min hago nocheg. You know, when things happen, they say, you know, something happens, they say, ha'olam min hago nocheg. The world functions according to its natural way. That's the Ramban taking this phrase of the Zer Zahav around the table, which focuses it towards the production of bread, bread being like the ultimate source of physical abundance in the world, and how you're going to get a loaf of bread out of a big bang is anyone's idea. But Nachmanides, on that Zer Zahav, when he says the world functions towards its natural way, brings one of the stories that are in the Tanakh. Now there's a dozen different stories he could bring, but the story he brings is about as bizarre as you can imagine. It's the first book of Kings, chapter 4, verse 1, 2, 3, 4. And it has to do with Elisha and the oil. Anybody know the story? The widow comes to Elisha. My husband's dead. He was a good guy. He wasn't one of these really bad guys. And he's dead, and the creditors are coming to take my children as indentured servants, which is a great step forward, by the way. You know, the fact that they would be indentured servants isn't the worst thing in the world. It might not be so good for mom, but you think of the other societies at the time, they'd probably read The Merchant of Venice. They would have been chopped up, and his arm would go to that person, that arm would go to that, you know. I mean, you know, Shakespeare. But they were going to be servants, so it sounds terrible, but it's not as bad as it was to the rest of the guys and gals around at the same time. So he's going to take. So the wife says, "What am I going to do? My sons are taken away." So this is Maimonides on the world functions towards its natural way. He says, "What do you have in the house? A bottle of oil. Go in the house, close your door, send your sons big investments." You know the story, right? And they pour and pour and pour, and the oil makes itself. It wasn't like they drilled into the ground and they found, you know, olive oil down below. It makes itself. No more pots. She goes out, no more pots. She tells Elisha to sell it and redeem your sons. The example that Nachmanides brings for the world functioning according to his way, and this is the year, Nachmanides, the Rambam's at the year 1250, because it's the Mikdal, so it's even earlier, but 1250 is how does the world function according to its natural way to get a loaf of bread out of this Big Bang? It makes itself. The example is the oil makes itself. Inflation makes itself. The universe expands by a factor of 10 to the 25th. To give you a scale, if the universe started off like about that, you know, like an afuna, a garden pea, something like that, a 10 to the 25th expansion would make it so large that it would take 100,000 years for light to travel from this side. It would be the size of the Milky Way. It would take 100,000, guess what, 10, that gives you a scale. Of course, the universe doesn't start off like this. It starts as less than a grain of mustard, to use from less than a grain of sand, minuscule amount. But inflation has the universe making itself, and the example of Nachmanides for how the universe functions according to is the universe makes itself. The oil made itself. So it's just interesting that these two, you know, I mean, when I first read it before I studied inflation, it sounds like, I mean, the Ramban is a very sensible person, but that's really off the wall. That's a reality, but apparently it is, and we just had it proven last week.
what's it making itself?
It makes itself. Somehow it regenerates itself.
So what's the what is it that?
Originally?
No, I'm saying but there has to be something there. Something,
That's what it doesn't have to be. That's what's so amazing. It makes itself.
So just more universe.
Just makes itself from that subatomic particle. Somehow regenerates itself. If I were a quantum physicist, I could tell you how it does it. But I mean, I wouldn't understand. You wouldn't understand the equations either. But that's the reality. Look, the fact that you can get a universe making itself from nothing is bizarre in itself. So the fact that you can get this grain of sand to be this big, that's a little more bizarre. But it does not require. It doesn't become more dilute. Unlike the air going up Kilimanjaro, it gets colder and colder. That's not what happens. This universe expands, retains its energy density, and that energy density at this point is enough to make you, me, the table, and every star in the universe.
Another question: Do you find that let's take your field within physics? Do you find that physicists per se have a bias against any notion of there being a creator, or do they simply say, "Listen, physics is the study of the physical universe, and the scientific method allows us to study the physical universe, but once you hit that wall, what can you possibly? You can't use science to study anything outside of the physical universe. So what's the point of talking about something outside of the physical universe?"
Well, except for the fact that this is, it's quantum physics, so it's science, and this is science saying that the universe was created from nothing by the laws of nature. That's what this diagram says. This is the concentration. This is straight from NASA. You probably remember from the NASA side. You cannot see the Torah gives us a bait at the beginning to tell us that you can't see before the beginning, and science says you can't because the universe is opaque. For the first 300,000 years, you can make theories about it, like inflation is a theory, like this is a theory. But all we can see is what's left over from those years, from when light breaks free, and that's about 300,000 years after the creation. That light has hints, fossils, as it were, of what was before, and that's what gives you the clue that these people have found. But there is the idea that you can have Yesh V'ayin, and that God would do this is not a problem. If you invent the laws of nature, you might as well use them. So what would be, so is there a problem? There's not, as I say, I'm quoting, that's what I quoted the physicists before, that if you want to call that God, call it God. It is an exact match of the biblical God, outside of time, not physical, a set of forces that act to create something from nothing. And that's what God does. Except the other half is getting away from the deist God into a theological God in which that God is interested in the universe. But that's why Moses breaks the calendar into two parts. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7. Remember the days of old. That's the 6 days of Genesis. The phenomena that would allow light beams to become alive. That's what this diagram says. Science holds by the fact that light beams can learn to feel love. It's bizarre, but that's what science holds.
What?
What?
What are you gonna say?
What are you asking?
About light beams?
The Big Bang didn't produce children to chop liver. It produced light beams. Super powerful light beams, electromagnetic radiation. And they became alive.
Okay.
Light beams learn to feel love. That's what this diagram says. This is us out here. Light beams learn to wonder about the history, because everything you see in this world is made from the light of creation. I apologize if you got this stuff on tape right from the last time I was here. But the simple fact is, everything is made from the first burst of energy. There is no further physical creation. There are spiritual creations, but not physical creations. The spirit, the nefesh, and the neshama, the souls. But every physical thing is made from this. Like that water bottle is filled with hydrogen and oxygen. Can you shake it, please? And when you drink water, you're literally drinking hydrogen and oxygen. That's what you're drinking. But I don't think there's a person in this room, and maybe in this city besides me, that the last time you took a drink of water, you said, "Wow, babes, give me some hydrogen and oxygen." Glug, 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 glug. Right? But that's what you're drinking. It never stops being hydrogen and oxygen. And the exact parallel is, when you look in the mirror in the morning, and for some of us it's pretty depressing, when you look in the mirror in the morning, you are literally, not figuratively, you are literally looking at the light of creation in the form of you. Just like when you drink water, you're literally drinking hydrogen and oxygen. It never stops being the energy of creation. The famous equation, E equals what? does not say that the E disappears, the energy disappears and becomes matter. That is exactly what it does not say. What it says is that E can change form and become matter, solid. It remains energy. You want to know how much energy you got to have in this 2 grams of what you got there? This E equals mc squared tells you how much energy is packed into those two. But it remains energy. Like water remains hydrogen and oxygen. It doesn't look like hydrogen, and it sure doesn't look like oxygen. But that's what it is. And this stuff doesn't look like the energy creation, but it is. Those atomic bombs that I saw detonated, the first was uranium, actually not atomic bombs detonated, is uranium-235 bomb. It wasn't that the stuff that's being made over, which way am I looking here, to the east. It wasn't that the uranium-235 metal changed form and became energy. It was always energy in the form of metal. It just takes certain conditions to make the ice turn into water and to break the water back into hydrogen and oxygen. But you can do things to that water to make it back into hydrogen, electrolysis to make it back into hydrogen and oxygen, and you can do things to the energy of uranium-235 that is in the form of metal to make it go back from the metal form to the energy form. That's what makes the bomb go bang. The scary part is that a gram of rose petals has exactly the same energy as a gram of uranium. It's just that it's easier to get the energy out of uranium, unless you're talking about love. Then it's easier to get the energy out of rose petals. So when you guys get married, do not bring your wife a gram of uranium. Bring her a couple of dozens of roses. It took me a few years to realize that one.
Before the Big Bang, that subatomic particle.
No, that's after the Big Bang.
Okay, so
before inflation.
We start from. Okay, let's go back before inflation. So the Big Bang. So that whatever was existing was there for endless amount of time.
No. There was nothing before. Nothing. There wasn't anything. The laws of nature were there.
Okay, so those laws of nature eventually, let's say, converted into an explosion.
Well, from them, yes, you could predict that they could, yes, okay, convert into an explosion, the Big Bang.
Okay, so now means, but before that, there was
God.
Okay, but let's say from a scientific way. Because my question is, what caused that all of a sudden at this juncture to make that explosion?
It's the Bible.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, and this art scroll probably says in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. The Jerusalem Bible says in the beginning that's the Septuagint. But as Rashi points out, neither of those can be correct. Because in the beginning God created the heavens. It isn't Bereshit bara. It's Bereshona bara. It's not Bereshit bara. It's Bereshona bara. But the Bible says Bereshit bara. So that's wrong. And the same thing, in other words, and the same thing, they dropped the T at the end of the of in the beginning of, and the art scroll translation is equally pointed out to be wrong. We read the Rashi as if, but he's pointing out these are wrong translations. That's why he sends us to Proverb number 8. If you want to figure it out, go to 8. And what it is, what's annoying about this is it exactly what physics says today. And it explains exactly the whole idea of the creation of the universe. In the beginning of God's creating, which is what the art scroll, in the beginning of God's creating isn't Beit Reish Aleph, it's Beit Reish, it's Beit Reish Vav Aleph. I remember, how do you say creating? In any event, it's spelled differently.
Beis Vav Reish Aleph.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and Rashi brings it down. Rashi brings down all 3 translations that we have today. Not because he knew the English translation to be like that, but he shows that they're wrong. How did he show they're wrong? Because it's a different piece of Hebrew. The text says Bereshit bara Elokim. So it's Bereshit with the first clause. And I did this last time, but I do it again because we just had Purim, and you got to report things in the name of the person. That's what saved the community there. So I learned this verse not from Rashi and not from anyone else other than the Ramban, Nachmanides, and he writes, if I can find it, because I know I got it here somewhere. He writes like this: if you will merit, now the Ramban is about the year 1250, so he's like 150 years after Rashi. If you will merit and understand the secret of the first word, Bereshit, you will know why the Jerusalem translation, the Targum Yushalayim, not the Jerusalem Bible, is with wisdom God created the heavens and the earth. So how did the Jerusalem translation have the chutzpah to say with wisdom? Because Bereshit with the first clause, and then Rashi sends us the Proverb number 8, and it says, I am wisdom. God created me as the beginning of God's ways. Before there was the earth, before there were the heavens, I was present. It goes on and on like that. When God formed the orbs and the of the earth, etc., I was present. So the question is, who's the I? God made me as the beginning of God's ways. Who's the me? I was there when God created. Who's the me? When Rashi sends us the verse 22 and 23, etc., he assumes you read the first 21 verses. And in verse 12 it says, I am wisdom. Wisdom is speaking here. The first emanation of God was wisdom. Physics calls it mind, intelligence, information. That's what science calls it. And Torah calls it wisdom. It's annoying because you will never convince a skeptic that the better translation is with the first cause of wisdom, God created the heavens. You'll never. Because they'll pull out everything that's translated. They won't know Hebrew. But they'll be willing to argue with the Bible and not know Hebrew. That won't slow them down. But it's the problem. It never meant in the beginning. That's the Greek on our mind. The Greek, the Septuagint messed up Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The other translations have to be wrong, because if one of them was right, you wouldn't have the others. I mean, it's just a pretty significant sentence, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. But it's with wisdom, b'chachma, or b'chachmata in Aramaic. B'chachma bara Elohim. With wisdom, which doesn't mean that God is wise, that God used a substrate called wisdom. And we call that wisdom the laws of nature. And that's why science today would say it looks like the universe knew we were coming. The laws of nature are perfect. We've done this stuff already, but just as we don't get onto the topic of the evening. And that's why this secular journal, Scientific American, right, Mike Schwirmer, etc., writes here, infinite Earths and parallel universes really exist. Really? Infinite Earths and parallel universes really exist. Now, how do they know that? And they tell you how, in the text and also in a graph. And they graph the laws of nature, and only where they overlap in this little place can you have complex life. You know, different kinds of life, but not complex life. So here's how they know that these really exist. Cosmologists infer. Notice the backpedaling. Here they really exist. Here they infer. Cosmologists infer the presence of level 2 parallel universes, all these other universes. How? By scrutinizing the properties of our universe. These properties, and they list the laws of nature and even plot them, were established, here's the assumption, were established by random processes during the birth of our universe. By random processes during the birth of our universe, yet they have exactly the values that sustain life. That suggests the existence of other universes with other values that do not sustain life. Really? The fact that our universe is made for life suggests that there are other universes not made for life? Where do they get that idea? But they don't. But they're stuck. Because what this secular journal has said is, if we have the only universe, we have a universe that's been designed for life. Not to form life, because no one has a clue about that, but to sustain life. And so it's so unlikely to get this long, long list of constants and laws of nature, etc., that fit like a hand in a glove to allow complexity to arise in any form. There's a whole list of things that are amazing. So how do you get around it? You have an infinite or near infinite gazillions of other universes, each with its own set of laws. Most of the laws are losers. Most of the universes can't do anything. And finally, one roll of the dice, you're going to go and get one that works. You know, you roll the dice off and someone's going to work. Anyway, so that's, I don't know what we're getting at here, but, so wisdom is what science calls today, and science says it exactly. You read the philosophical writings of the quantum physicists, and they will tell you that the universe is more an illusion than a physical reality. It's hard for us to believe it because we're in this, and that the real substrate of the universe is information. Heisenberg, Nobel laureate, information. Wald, Nobel laureate, mind. James Jeans, idea. I mean, the list goes on and on with all the same statement. Mind, information, idea, wisdom. It's all the same. The Torah's been saying this for 3,000 years. Science has been saying it since about 1950. That the universe is we're in the physical universe, but as the second Nobel laureate in quantum physics said, Gerald Schroeder, the reason that we think that we are in the universe is that our body, the reason that we think that we are in the physical picture is that our bodies are in the physical picture, and that is the only way of our communicating them. You notice the difference here? we are not our bodies, which makes a lot of sense. Think about life and death, and this idea of there being something non-physical that is really the essence of us. It's what leads to the idea of having free will or not, something I'm working on now. But in other words, we are not, it's strange to say we are not in the picture. Our concept of ourselves is that we're outside, but our physical bodies are in the picture. And he says that's the only way of our communicating is through our brain. Because the brain has a part in it that is sensitive to pick up what skeptics call, these skeptics I was mentioning, a phantom self. The brain has a part in it that is programmed to pick up an aspect of you that is not the physical you. It's the origin that allows you to have free will. It's something I'm trying to write at the moment. This is often a tangent, but by the way, what time do we end? No, that's okay. It's already we started about 10 minutes late. So, okay. Anyway, but just as an example, because if you think that you have free will, because you perceive that you have free will, you're dreaming unless something non-physical exists. Because if the body is totally, if all that you are is physical, I don't mean soul, I mean physical, there's no place for free will. Chemistry of your brain determines either it's deterministic or it's random. It's either it's quantum physics random or it's determined by the laws of nature. Neither way it's free will, that you choose. But the key to having free will is that there's a part of the human body that is not bound by the physical body. And how do we know that? How do I know it? By working with the skeptics. Like I only use ancient commentary for my books. I only use skeptics that say there's no free will of the data. If you're doing open brain surgery and you touch a part of the brain back here, and as I say it's pitch black, and you touch a part of the brain here, the patient sees light. There's no light in the room. The patient sees light. Why? Because the brain, this part of the brain, when it's the visual cortex, the visual cortex, when it's stimulated, perceives light. Alternatively, there are radiations out here called, of certain wavelength that when they hit your eye, they send information back here, and you see light. That's interesting. So the brain actually is wired to pick up this radiation. Out here, it's not light; it's just radiation. It's only inside your head where this phenomenon of light appears. Can you touch a part over here and also over here, and you hear sound? But I also know if I go like this, I make molecules move. They hit my ear, stimulate nerves, and I hear sound. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems that wherever I touch in the brain, it reacts to as if there's something that's also outside the brain. I touch another location and I smell garlic. Well, there's no garlic in the room. Why am I smelling garlic? Well, because because these nerves I have here are sensitized to the molecules that garlic gives off. When they hit them, it stimulates a nerve, and that sends it to your olfactory, your places, with your sense of smell, and you smell garlic, even though there's no garlic present. What you discover is, no matter where you touch in the brain, you suddenly get this, and let's call it like a duality. You can stimulate light, the sensation of light, or you can turn the lights on, the radiation comes to here, you see light. You can stimulate the sensation of sound, or you can clap your hands, the molecules come, and they hit here. You can stimulate the sense of garlic, or you can get some garlic and smell it. The brain is wired to pick up reality outside of the body. That's what the brain does. Every bit of reality that you see is between here and here. Totally. Everything is in your head. So I see that it's inside and outside for light, inside and outside for sound, for garlic, go over the whole kit and caboodle. And then I touch a part of the brain over here, and I discover I get the sensation, to use Mike Schwirmer's words, the super skeptic of Scientific American, a phantom self. A phantom self, as if there's a part of my body outside my body. Now that's interesting, because every other aspect of the brain, when it indicates a certain phenomena, it's also measurable out here. I can measure the radiations that we call light waves. I can measure the molecules that we call sound. I can make a machine that picks up the molecules of garlic. The brain is wired to pick up reality outside. And when I touch the brain over here, I get the phantom self. Now, I can't make a machine that will measure the phantom self. The brain's the only antenna that picks it up. So if the phantom self were not real, then the likelihood the brain wouldn't have the position to pick it up, because we know, taking again these people from Rebecca Sachs at MIT and Orth Blank in Europe and Oliver Sacks, not these Sacks, not John, these neurologists, we know that when something is no longer being used, like for instance, God forbid, a person loses his eyes, or a child is born without functioning eyes, but the visual cortex is still functioning. So gradually, the brain, which is highly aggressive, takes over that spot for language. The brain doesn't waste space. It's extremely aggressive. The nerves that used to be used for light are essentially pushed aside or reprogrammed, and now they go for language, for improved language, hearing, and sensitivity. So if that phantom self didn't actually exist, then millennia ago, when we were still climbing out of the trees, it would have been lost. The brain would have used that spot for something else. The fact that it hasn't used it for something else indicates that it's real. It's not hallucination. It's real. The argument of Mike Schwimmer is, well, it's a hallucination, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, because every place, I'm going on something obviously interesting because I'm trying to write a book about it, okay? But I think it's kind of a little bit of a breakthrough of trying to understand proof that you have free will, because feeling you have free will means absolute nothing. How much nothing? Wiggle your toes. Please, everyone, wiggle their toes. Where do you feel your toes?
Bottom of your shoe.
No. Toes don't feel a thing. Absolutely nothing. The entire sensation of your wiggling toes is up here. You can't prove it. Yes, you can. God forbid a person loses the toes, they're still wiggling. Everything is up here. Everything. Everything you sense in the entire world is up here. It's a bit too philosophical, but evolution's easier to deal with. But it's here, from head to toe. Literally from head to toe. So right here. Every sensation you have is here. Perceptions aren't good. The fact that I have a perception like my choices is meaningless. Like I may perceive that I'm feeling and I'm sure I'm feeling my toes on my toes. I can feel it right now, wiggling, and I can feel it. It's all up here, every bit of it. They have body maps that trick you to think it's happening down there. In the physical world, you step on the stone, and you think it's solid. Well, it is solid. I can't go to that stone. The amount of solidity in percentage of the stone is this: 0. That's the fraction of this stone floor that's solid. The rest is empty and forces. If you're solid, don't be fooled by perceptions. The fact that you may perceive you have free will does not prove you have it. You have to find data that show it. I think those data that mentioned do show it. Yeah.
I just wanted to better understand the concept. The phantom self, like what exactly is that? You're saying it's like a free will, but what is the
No, it's a part of you that's outside your body that is not shackled to the physical.
What does the section of the brain do?
What? Your brain is the antenna that picks it up.
It's just, so he's saying that there's this thing that this certain part of the brain does that we can't fully understand, and so you're positing that it's the cellular.
No, these skeptics that I mentioned their names of, when this part is touched, if it senses something outside the body.
What does he say that is?
A phantom self. You. The you that's really you.
Like a personality.
I don't know how you're going to say it. I know when I touch over here and I sense something outside my body also. Electromagnetic radiation. I can measure those things.
Okay.
The phantom self is the part of you that is you.
So he says
that is really you. That's exactly what Schrodinger says when he says we are not in this picture. Our bodies are in the picture. It's hard to believe it. But what it does mean is that the brain, that life is not shackled to the brain. The brain is like the radio, and the radio waves are out here. That would be the phantom self. Smash the radio waves are just fine.
Okay, but what does he say then about like the other parts of the brain that like, what does he say that is in relation to like the parts of the brain like memories and stuff like that?
Oh, the information, it can only choose from what you put into it can only choose what you put into your window of choice. It's not going to let you suddenly wake up in the morning and discuss with, when you get married, honey, you know that de Broglie wave equation? What do you think about that? Well, what did you think about it this morning? I'm asking you.
There's a few ideas for this.
Yeah? Okay, let's have it. So why did you think about it? Because the mind can't deal with that. You didn't put in the hopper already. Every human being has a window of choice. But that choice isn't totally fixed by the chemistry. What you put in there, you actually have a choice of what you put in. You have a choice to put in horrendous things in, or mediocre things in, or good things in. Pasteur said it perfectly. Chance favors the prepared mind. You know, in other words, what you put into that hopper there, and your mind your body and your mind have a debate about what to choose from. Okay. It's probably like the nefesh and the neshama arguing. You know, whether the body wants this, and the neshama says, let's do it this way, and the nefesh says, no, this between physicality. But you can, I understand, I may be wrong, this is totally theory, that the mind, the you that's you, can only choose what you put in already. But you've had a choice. If this phantom self didn't exist, you would have never had any choice of what you put into that window of choice. Because you would have been programmed from the time of the Big Bang. And everything, or for your mother and your father, who knows what, be programmed already. But the fact that there's a part of you that's not fixed by the laws of chemistry, because your brain is fixed by the laws of chemistry. That's absolutely certain. Either it's deterministic, or it's quantum probability. Either way, it's not choice. Yeah. But the mind isn't shackled by that. That's the breakthrough. The mind is separate, and the fact that these naysayers say you've got this hallucination outside your body is extremely important. Because if a Bible thumper says it, I hope you wouldn't even believe it, because you'd be desperate to make it work. But these guys are 100%. Roberta Sexton, that talks at MIT, Jewish lady to say, she's absolutely certain we do not have free will. But she tells me about the phantom self. She quotes other data about the phantom self. Well, isn't that interesting? What's the phantom self? The phantom self happens to be the origin. That's why in studying the Bible relative to science, only use ancient commentary, and in Bibles and studying yourself relative to free will, only use the naysayers, the ones that say no, because they don't realize it. Like I have no idea if the people that demonstrated this diagram realize it's a super theological statement, but it was. And just this is this disaster we're getting. But just the other 80%. Just to make the other 80%, then a question. This is like this biblical God. This science God is like 75% or so the biblical God. The other half of the God is God active in the universe. And we talked about that before. The Jews are the marker, for better or for worse. God says it point blank that we are the marker in this world. At the golden calf, when God's going to wipe out the world, and he says, Hanichali to Moshe, really mean, leave me alone, but it really means argue with me. Moses explains to God that it's not in God's best interest to wipe out the people. Because why? Because the Egyptians are going to say they took them out to kill them in the desert. Really? Who cares what the Egyptians say? You just got them drowning, a bunch of them. Guess who cares what the Egyptians said? God. When the spies come back, let's go back to the men all said, let's go back to Egypt. And God hits the roof and says, they're going to wipe you out for sure. And again, Moses gives God the facts of life. You can do it, but the nations of the world are going to say you're a wimp. You killed him in the desert because you couldn't bring him into Canaan. You weren't strong enough. And what does God say? You're right. I'll punish them, but I'm not going to wipe you out. And in the ultimate slap in the face is Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26 and verse 27, 28, where God says, point blank, you're a chapter and a half from the end of the 5 books of Moses, the end of the Torah. Deuteronomy chapter. It's frightening. We talk about some of the students. The guy went into deep depression. One of my students at age, because what does it say? God says, I would have wiped you off the face of the mountain. I would have wiped you off the face of her. Your memory would cease. You're such cruds. I would have wiped you out. It's a straight statement. God is telling the people a chapter and a half before the end of the Bible. He would have preferred wiping us out because we're such nudniks. He said, but I can't do it. I can't do it. Because the nations of the world will say it was by their hand that they did it, and it wasn't me allowing them to do it. Notice who's important to God? The nations of the world. Jews are chosen in the marker. Like the Talmud, it says you can be the worst of the best. We're the best. We know you can be the worst. We got Madoff, who ruined hundreds of thousands of people's lives. But you also have Salk and Sabin and Waze, and all these other wonderful things that happen. So we got a good going for us, good going also. But it's quite a statement, really. Every time you think it's so wonderful, just go to Deuteronomy. Not before you go to sleep. It's pretty depressing. But it's exactly what David Hartman said, of blessed memory. God fell in love with Abraham and got stuck with his grandchildren. It's a perfect statement. God fell in love with Abraham and got stuck with his grandchildren. God is essentially, it's strange to say it, has backed God's self into a corner. We are his marker. Let's just hope. God doesn't change God's mind. At least we'll get knocked around, but we still survive. Yeah.
How does the phantom self compare with like the consciousness?
It might be. I would say that's probably the best analogy of world consciousness. That's what I think is. And what it's interesting, even what Time magazine maybe 15 years ago had an article, what would the end, maybe 10 years, what was the end of the universe? Because the event, even if God forbid the Messiah never came, it went on and on, the universe would reach a heat death. The temperatures of everything would be more or less the same. And what Time magazine said then, what might survive, this goes back, is an unbodied consciousness. Because you don't need energy for the phantom self, for the consciousness. It's only when we think that consciousness is seated in the brain, then you gotta have energy. But if it's outside the physical world, which I think it is, then I think it's, in other words, the only argument against this is what people like Mike Schwimmer say, that it's hallucination. But it doesn't make sense, because why would the body retain a part of the brain when we know the brain's aggressive? If it's not used, if you don't lose it, what is it? You don't use it, you lose it or something, whatever it is. Why would it remain hallucination? Hallucination is exactly what you don't want when you're trying to survive in a desert or in a jungle. You don't want to hallucinate. If you hear noise in the branches, you better know real well whether it's a leopard or the wind moving the branches. Because if it's a leopard, you're not going to be around for breakfast tomorrow morning. So you don't want hallucinations. You want reality. So it doesn't make, and that's my understanding. Of course, other people like Schwimmer say it's a hallucination.
If that phantom self is a actual physical part of the mind, then what?
No, it's not. The physical mind is an antenna that can pick up. Like this is an antenna for this.
That is constantly being stimulated.
It's this interact. I know it's constantly. It interacts with consciousness.
Through what?
What?
Through how? Just like the radio waves are interacting with our brain to create.
Because they're physical. Yeah.
So what is? Do we know what is?
That's the problem. We can't measure that other half of the duality. We can make machines that pick up wavelengths of radiation. Wavelengths of certain length, we can then see that.
Even if we couldn't measure them, we know what. I mean, let's just say theoretically, if you couldn't measure them, you still know what they are.
Why?
Here, we don't even know what they are.
Why? Supposing you couldn't measure suppose we had no skill in being able to make a machine that would measure radiation. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't know what's coming out of the light. All I know is I look over there, something happens in my brain that gives light. There's no sensation of light outside, right. It's all in the brain. There's radiation out here. But I can measure that wavelength, so I know it. Otherwise, I wouldn't know it. Mm-hmm. The difficulty is there's nothing to measure the phantom self, hence the word phantom. That's the difficulty, that half of the duality. So the argument is, well, why should there be a dualistic world? That's one of the arguments. Why should it be dualistic? Why should it be a dualistic world? The whole world is dualistic. Wave, particle. Everything is a wave, and everything is a particle simultaneously. It's ridiculous. But notice one is solid and one is ethereal. Or matter and energy. The whole universe is dualistic. Matter is solid, brain. Energy is like, ethereal. It's there, but it's in the range of, it's there, but it's very different. You can grab a particle, but you can't grab a wave. You can grab, wave particles and energy and matter. You can grab the matter, but you can't grab it. It's the same type of thing. So the world is already dualistic, and that's the argument Descartes started. How many years ago? So many centuries ago. The idea of the dualism. So people argue, why should it be dualistic? The whole world is dualistic. The entire physical world is dualistic. And that's proven. That's not a theory. So the idea of mind and brain, the only difficulty is, you said, you can't make a machine for the mind. Just for the brain. Because it's a phantom. Because it is, it's not. The whole key is that it's not physical. That's the whole key. But then the creation of the universe is from absolute nothing. That's science. So this stuff is outside the physical world. And it creates the physical world. Excuse me, go.
Do animals have this phantom self?
I have no idea.
No one has no
Some of these studies, that was one of the attempts to try. George Wall talks about it, the Nobel laureate biologist, mentions an animal, do they see like I see, and then he brings feel this, and then he says, but a photoelectric cell opens the garage door, or opens your car doors. And, in those days, these machines sense things also, but do they feel that they're sensing it? So I don't have any idea. It would seem that maybe monkeys can, or chimps, and also parakeets. There's a woman that did, it was a brilliant idea. She started working with parakeets because they speak. Or what are they? Not what are tukis? What are tukis?
Parrots.
Parrots, yeah, with parrots. And they speak. She taught them a bunch of languages, and the tuki would ask for breakfast. Now, whether it was really fancy for breakfast, but it was really smart. I mean, what a brilliant woman. It took her years to do it. But she taught them the animal enough words. The animal asked for different things. So, but I have no idea. I don't know. For sure, they don't have a neshama. They don't have a neshama. Neshama is what makes us human. And the neshama changed the world. We talked about once, maybe we didn't, but the neshama changed the world completely. The neshama came, that's Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where God creates the Adam, et Adam, the Adam. Peggy Kitts points that. Verse 26, God makes Adam. Verse 27 isn't God creates Adam. God creates et ha-Adam, the Adam. And that neshama changed the world to such an extent that the British Museum in London, I don't urge you to leave Israel ever, so you can probably see it on YouTube or something, has an entire wing devoted to the change that took place in society. Change that took place in society, I think we talked about this maybe in the age of the universe, 5,500 years ago. They dated, rounded off. 5,500 years ago, in this plaque on the wall, in the 3 flights up in the British Museum, the entire wing, here, me. Here. To prove. So Barbara and I were giving lectures. We were there again about a month ago. She was giving lectures, I was giving lectures. And we had an afternoon off, we went there. It's amazing. They document that 5,500 years ago, about when is Adam, 57, and it's right after Adam, the world changed. Sociologically, the world changed to such an extent that in this high-value property in the middle of London, they have an entire wing, one of the third floor, to the change that took place in society. It was a sociological change. Large cities, trading, writing, it all happens right then. I asked the curator, why? And you know what his answer was? We don't know. Change. I didn't mention God, God forbid. I didn't mention the Bible, the Shema, Adam, anything like that. I just wanted to hear what his idea was. They have no idea. But it's such a dramatic change that they devote a huge amount of space for this change. Society changed. And it wasn't a population explosion, it was back 10,000 years. To the invention of farming.
Maybe I'm just confused about the whole phantom self concept, but can't they just see if an animal's brain has the same section that our brain does, then interacts with
They can't respond.
I have no, maybe yes, and not being, what do I know? I know what these people tell me, that they don't have free will, but they all talk about the phantom self. There is work that has been done with animals. I'm sure you can find it with very little problem. The best source would be if you go up and you look up Olaf, O-L-A-F, Olaf blank, B-L-A-N-K-E, and then there'll be a whole list of references beyond that.
Okay.
He was the first to doing this stuff, and others have done now. Yeah.
Just like the part of the brain that can pinpoint sound and pinpoint light, can you pinpoint the part of the brain that is the phantom menace? The phantom, the phantom self?
Yeah, that's the whole point. What did you say before? I missed it. What you said?
It was the Phantom Menace.
It's a movie.
Oh, what is it called?
Phantom Menace.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's the whole. No, that's of course. That's the whole point. How would you know? How would you know that? No, that's exactly the whole point. There's a point. That's the whole purpose. A point. There's a place in your brain where, when it's touched, it produces the sensation of the phantom self. That's the key. Like there's a place in your brain for light, for sound, for garlic, etc., etc., etc. There's a place in the brain when it is stimulated. I touch here, obviously. It's what we're talking about inside the brain. That induces. That's the whole point. Why is it there? Why is this place right about? It's somewhere about if you drew lines like here and here. It's more or less in that location. Why is it there? Unless it really exists. Everything else the brain has in it is useful. It's kind of like the DNA. Oh, you thought there's so much wasted space. There's no wasted space. Is that a stretch? You're hand.
It's a hand.
Okay, because I want just to time it. It's getting late. Yeah. What?
I just want to ask. Can we say that like this phantom self is, like, I don't know, it's sort of like the neshama? Because like.
Well,
it's
I know, consciousness, whatever, I don't know if it's the neshama, maybe it's influenced by the neshama. I would guess the phantom self would be strong, I would hope, strongly influenced by the neshama, and the brain and the body would be strongly influenced by the nefesh.
But it's definitely not the neshama.
What?
It's definitely not the neshama.
I don't say it's nothing, it might be the neshama, I don't know, who knows what the neshama is besides it's something that makes you act like a normal human being, sometimes. So it might be the seat of the neshama. It's certainly something that argues that when you're choosing from the window of choice, you'd be aiming towards choosing something that isn't just like totally ego. It'd be something that might be more global. Anyway, that's the seat, I would say, of free will, because without that, there's no free will. Just like you're sure you got free will and you're sure you're feeling your toes. You're not feeling your toes. Chemistry and physics would say there is no free will. Two things about evolution. Okay. That life developed from the simple to the complex. Be careful when you have discussions about these things, because they always try to put, I've had the problem also. There was a movie about 10 years ago called Expelled. I'm in for about that much time. But it was enough to get some people in Scientific American to say Schroeder doesn't believe in evolution. You know what? Schroeder doesn't believe in evolution. But Schroeder does believe that life developed from the simple to the complex. The question is what drove the development. But the idea is always marginalize you. Okay? So the problem is this. When you look, and then I'll get to two examples. Evolution has a definition. As the late Rosh Yeshiva North Weinberg, magnificent human being, said, you can have a discussion. First thing you have to do is define your terms. The definition of evolution in its strict meaning, not some sloppy meaning, is a two-stage process. You could probably tell me yourself also what you know, but it's just so late I'll just say it myself. Random mutations in the sex line produce changes so that the progeny, the offspring, the babies, are either stronger or weaker, smarter or dumber, faster or slower. The characteristics are changed. That is the first stage, it's random. The second stage is 100% not random. Strong lions eat weak lions. That's not random. The reason that there are not a lot of lions in the world has nothing to do with hunters. Lions eat lions. That's what happened. And you know what? Strong lions eat weak lions. So that's not random. Fast cheetah get more food than slow cheetah. So the fast cheetah's babies get more food than the slow cheetah's baby. In other words, the second stage is 100% not random. Those that are more fit for the world get more food and live longer. Those that are less fit, they die. But the first stage is crucial. The definition being random, with the emphasis on random. You can be sloppy and just use the word mutations, but that's not what the implication is, that the mutations are random. Now, first of all, there are no data whatsoever, zero, that show that the mutations are random. There are no data that support that. That the mutations happen, absolutely. I hope so, or the Bible's wrong, because the Bible says life starts in the animal life. Starts in the waters, which is exactly how it does, moves to the land, becomes mammal, becomes people. That's all the Bible says. 6 sentences from the first animals till people, till Adam. 6 sentences. The fossil record has millions of samples, shows details. So the flow happened. The question is what drove the flow. If you use the word evolution, then you're making a theological statement, and eventually there's going to be some, I say this so often, that maybe someone, some good lawyer, has to be a smart lawyer, will take it to the courts, and it will be forbidden in public school science classes that receive public funding to teach, or to preach really, it's more preaching, evolution as the meaning of as what the word actually means. Random mutations. That statement is a theological statement, and by federal court in the United States, it is forbidden to teach theology in public school, publicly funded science classes. So the word evolution should either have to be redefined or excluded, because it is a theological statement. It's a negative theological statement, but it is theology, and that's forbidden. It says God is not active. It's random. That's theology. Saying God is not active is a theological statement. I can't understand why some lawyers haven't taken, because they'll win the case. If they're smart. If they're dummies, because not every lawyer is smart. If they're dummies, they won't. But if they're smart, they'll be able to show that it is a negative theological statement, that the word should be development. Did life develop from the simple to the complex? Absolutely. The Torah's been saying it for 3,000 years. Science has been saying it for about 200 years. That life developed from the simple to the complex. What drove the development? The word develop is completely neutral. Was it random? Maybe. Was it God? Maybe. Was it a mix of random and God? Maybe. It doesn't take a theological stand. That's what should be allowed to be taught in the schools, and make it clear that we don't know what drove the change, what drove the mutation, because there are no data, zero, that show that the mutations are random. That the mutations happen, cosmic rays, however food, whatever chemistry, then we know happened. But what made it happen is completely unknown. And I can guarantee you, when you take any evolutionist into a corner, back into the corner and say, show me how you know that, well, it was a cosmic ray. Yeah, it was a cosmic ray, so the cosmic ray has to be random? In other words, the point is, it's crucial to see the difference and to understand how you're taught. And I want to give two quick examples. It's getting quite late, but here's two examples. This is from the New Scientist. It's not peer-reviewed, but it's kind of interesting. It quotes peer-reviewed data. It's called the humanity switch. And it shows the development or the change in skull shape from chimp, time going by, to human. Okay? And the humanity switch is exactly the right term for here, because you just got there talking about the entire world for you is in your head. And the shape of and from all that we see from animals today, the shape of the skull mirrors the shape of the brain. Okay? So the shape of the brain changes. So here we have the animal, this change. And these are the data. We didn't do this last time, did we? Remember? No. These are the data plotted here. So the change from here to here. And that plot is very interesting. I'm just going to put it on the board. Remember, we're stuck in this box here. And what we have here is a plot. These are people. This complexity over time. We have a gene back here that exists. It exists from before this whole flow here now. And at this point right here, our common ancestor with the chimps breaks off. It's about 5 million years ago. We talked about these age of the universe the last time I was here. And that matches very well with the geology of the world. So we have a common ancestor. Remember, we are about genetically between 98 and 99% chimpanzee. If you don't believe that, just read the newspapers. Then what happens is this gene duplicates itself. Interesting. And another common ancestor breaks off. It's called the you may pronounce it, the Australopithecus. I'm not going to try to spell it. Just write AU. This happened about 2.5 million years ago. And then, while this duplication is rare, but what's very rare is this gene that was already present not only duplicates itself once, but duplicates itself again. That's very rare. And you get people-sized heads. Notice the gene was already present. The gene was already present. And duplicates itself. And it duplicates itself, becomes more and more online, and you end up with people sleeping through lectures. And it's amazing. So the question is, how did it happen? No, how did it happen? Well, we're told how it happened. So those are the data. Those are the only data presented. Here's the summary of the article. Here's the summary of the article. The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of random mutations, every one of them happening by chance. Is that what the article said? The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of random mutations, every one of them happening by chance. That's what the article said. The article said the following. The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of mutations. Not random and not chance. We have no idea if they're random or chance. And it looks like they're not random because the information was already present. Lots of things are already present. The same hormone that makes one elephant sexy to another elephant makes one morph sexy to another morph. The protein is identical. It can't happen by chance twice. You have to go back to a common ancestor between moths and elephants. You have to go back 500 million years to the beginning of animal life. There's no common ancestor, but that information was already there. There's a dozen other things that are the same also, crucial things, like the formation of eyes, etc. It's all programmed, it's all what does it mean? It doesn't prove there's a God, but what it does prove is we don't understand evolution. So that's it. Yeah, then one more thing, we're finished. Just go ahead.
So according to this charter here, so
say it again, what?
According to this, where in the next 500 million years, what would be
I have no idea.
the next?
What? You'll be all mind and no body. But then the Messiah will be here. And the Messiah will be here, and we'll all just be a bunch of happy little consciences floating around in space. Just another example of how what I'm trying to show here is how information is skewed, because there are no data that support randomness. The data are there that support the changes. Absolutely. Is that a hand? Just straight out.
In quantum, for example, when they're looking at the rays of light, they call them random, even though they could, because there's no current explanation. So, doesn't the scientific community just say if it's not understood for any particular reason to call it random?
Yeah, which is like the cop-out almost. It's like the guard of the gaps, but in the other direction. You know, the unguard of the gaps. They call it random. Well, that's what Scientific Americans showed about the many universes. You know.
But you're saying random is a theological statement.
No, I'm saying that evolution is a theological statement if you say the mutations occurred randomly. It is saying that there's no divine, no metaphysical input. And that's a theological statement. It absolutely is.
It's an atheist.
It's a negative statement. God is not present. Atheism is a theology. You know, it's an it's a religious stand. Atheism isn't neutral. The word development is completely neutral. It doesn't say, it says it happened, but it doesn't say why it happened.
So you prefer to take an agnostic stand when they're teaching the...
You have to. You're not going to be able to teach God in science, but you shouldn't be allowed to teach no God in science. That's what should be forbidden. And it's just amazing. There's so many smart Jewish lawyers, you know, put them away from trying to protect the Palestinians and let them fight for a revolution. Okay? Yeah. Anyway, just one other example, because it's really getting late now. Here it is. Tibetan cited, this is the New York Times, it's 4 columns wide, it's the second page, not page 8 where you go up in the garbage. 4 columns wide. You remember did we talk about this?
We did.
What?
I don't think we did.
Okay. You probably remember better. 4 columns wide, second page, Tibetans cited as recent case of evolutionary change. Wow, you dummies that think there's no evolution. Here's living evolution right here. And not only that, but it's from the journal Science. Again, one of the 2 leading peer-reviewed science journals in the world. Journal Science, published in the States. Nature's published in the British Isles. And what is this study? Well, they're pretty amazed. These guys and gals that do this experiment are just flabbergasted by the fact that the Tibetans can live at 14,000 feet and function. And at 14 feet, you can barely breathe. You know, you're huffing and puffing. But they're just doing fine. So they decide to figure out why they're doing fine. So these scientists that get published in the journal Science, again, peer review, go up to a mountain, 14,000 feet, how they even worked up there, I have no idea. And they took a population of very large sampling, and they measured the characteristics of the blood. And what they found out that these people did not have more hemoglobin, that's the red part of the blood that catches the oxygen. The hemoglobin had a mutation that made it proactive. I mean, it literally grabbed the oxygen. Proactive, amazing. And the abundance, the frequency was of this large, 87% of the Tibetans that they studied, and it's a very large sampling, have this mutation. And well, see, you don't really want the mutation because it kills you. But it kills you after your early childbearing ages. Like, we wouldn't want to have sickle cell anemia, but you'd sure want it if you're in the jungle somewhere. It may kill you eventually, but you'll live long enough to have kids. Okay, because it suppresses the effects of malaria. You know, so not every mutation that kills you is bad for you. I mean, except at the end. This mutation may kill you, but unless you have, it keeps you functioning in these high altitudes. But to get published in Science, you have to do a background study. So it turns out the Tibetans aren't really Tibetans. Oh, interesting. They're really Han Chinese that moved up for about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago from the Beijing area, where they still live to today. Some of them moved up to the mountains. Who knows, through any mosquitoes, war, whatever. So a group of them decided to leave. So the way you do a background study is you go look at the Han Chinese living at sea level. Now the nature of this mutation is such that you can tell it happened by looking at passive mutations, Indian mutation like this, that it can happen long, long before these 3,000 years ago when the Han Chinese moved up. Of course, part of the logic of China owning Tibet is that they're already Chinese anyway. It's 4,000 years ago. There wasn't even England at that time. So what happens? So they go down, the scientists go down in the Beijing area, and they measure the people in the Beijing area. And they found not 87%, but only 9% abundant. Now, why shouldn't it be 100%, much higher, 87, 90, 80, whatever? Because I said it kills you. Because the Beijing area, you don't need this. So you can have kids while you're young and also when you're old. But with this mutation, you never get to be old. You die after your early childbearing ages. So you don't really want it at sea level. But there's the mutation down there. So let's go back, we're going to go back now 3,000 years when the migration takes place. Go back 3,000 years, the world's pretty different. There was, I mean, it was England, who knows what was Anglo-Saxon. And you go back 3,000 years, and a bunch of Han Chinese decide to get out of this mucky, whatever, environment and go up to the mountains where the air seems pure. And, as I say, the Han Chinese, it's 9% abundant at sea level. So if 100 families decide to go up to the mountain, and it's 9% abundant, how many of the 100 families have the mutation? 9% of 100 equals? 9. And how many don't have it? 91. So now the 100 families go up, 9 have it, 91 don't have it. You get up to the top and you can imagine what's happening. They're working in the fields all day. So at the end of the day, the 91 families that don't have the mutation, hey, honey, yeah, that's right, honey, but let's wait for Shabbos. Okay. But the 9% that have it, kid, let's go for it. Well, as many kids as we possibly can. Because what's the problem? We're not tired, we're just fine. And that's what happens. So over the next 3,000 years, the 9% gradually becomes 87%. And over the next 500 years, it'll probably be 95%. Because that's what happens. The fact is, it's more adaptable. It's better. So now let's look at the definition of the headline, because this is what the average person reads. Tibetans cited as recent case of evolutionary change. Really? What's evolution? Evolution is when you have the mutation and it happens within the period of making the experiment. Was this mutation already present 3,000 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah, for about 10,000. So it wasn't a new mutation. To call it evolution, then it has to be that they move up to the mountain, bingo, the cosmic rays come in, and they get a new something up there. The information was already present at sea level. They move up to the mountain, and that becomes dominant. At sea level, it's subservient. It's not dominant because you don't want it. You go up to the mountain, it becomes dominant. That's not evolution. It's called adaptation. It's called adaptation. Now we go back to the science journal. Unlike the New York Times, which is not peer-reviewed, obviously. We go back to the journal Science, which is heavily peer-reviewed. And guess what word does not appear in the Science journal? I'll point to it. What word doesn't appear?
Can't see it.
Can't see it?
Evolution.
Evolution. It's called adaptation, because that's what it is. So why would the New York Times editor change the word evolution to change the word adaptation, which is the Science journal, into evolution? You know why? Because evolution sells newspapers. Adaptation is pretty boring. And no one's going to buy the newspaper because you're going to cut out, so look at this adaptation, big deal. But there's a lot of people that cut out this newspaper article and say, you know, Junior, going to yeshiva, and your mind, here's proof, you jerk, ya. I told you to stay at MIT and not go up to this place. You know? Because it's proven. But it wasn't evolution, it was adaptation. So why'd they change it? Because newspapers are in one business only, selling newspapers. Evolution sells newspapers. Adaptation doesn't sell newspapers. And the goal of a newspaper is to sell as many copies as it can, because then advertisers pay more and more to be in the newspaper. What's the largest selling newspaper in Israel today? First or second? What is it? Huh?
That's Yisrael Hayom.
Israel Hayom. It's free.
It's free.
Israel Today. Israel. It's only Israel Hayom. It's free. You see these guys in red and gals in red jumpsuits passing it out?
Oh, yeah.
It's free. So how can it stay? How can it stay in existence? Because it's filled with ads, and the ads are interesting. Actually, everyone picks it up. You're going to get another one. Why not? You know, they're really interesting types of ads for travel and all this kind of stuff. So, got to be careful when you're giving the information. I would not suggest literally challenging. If you're in a maslul, in a biology track, I wouldn't suggest challenging your professor about forcing him or her to prove it's random if you're going to lose and be kicked out of your class or flunked, because that can happen. If you don't think so, just watch the movie Expelled. Okay, where it documents, and it has to be true because the people's names are named. Otherwise, there'd be lawsuits, gazillion lawsuits, of where they've been forced out of their positions because they take positions which say it's not evolution, as an example, it's adaptation. It's no random. How do you show it's random? Really, the laws of nature are random? That this is random? How do you know it's random? There's no proof it's random. Be careful. So I wouldn't suggest challenging your professor until after you get the degree. Unless it's a random professor. But that's, anyway, I think it's pretty much, to get into Adam at this point, we can do it another time. Adam, the key is that Adam, this we talked a little bit about in the age of the universe. Adam is not the first Homo sapiens sapien. Adam, according to Chazal, Adam is the first Homo sapiens sapien with a neshama. That makes the whole difference. And that allows for all, put it this way, cavemen never bothered Nachmanides, never bothered Maimonides. They bothered my I don't want to say because he's not living there, my bar mitzvah teacher maybe, but they didn't bother these sages. Because they understood that there are these beings around that were completely human in shape and intelligence. They just weren't human. They didn't have a neshama. But that's for another time. And there's a couple of chapters in the science of God. Anyway, I think it's, yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schroeder.
Okay.
I read something online about how carbon dating might not be so accurate.
Never, ever. You don't have to get all that. Use carbon dating. Never refer to it. It shows you're off your turf.
Okay.
Because carbon dating, first of all, is pretty good. It's plus or minus 10%. So whether it's 30,000 or 27,000 years, it's not going to make much difference. But fortunately, it's uranium-thorium that overlaps most of carbon-14, which is totally different chemistry, totally different physical conditions, gives the same answers. So don't worry about carbon-14. Radioactive, there are about a dozen, I'm exaggerating, there are about 6 radioactive clocks that go from short periods up to billions of years. And they usually overlap as they, at the interface. So carbon-14 has a slight problem, but it turns out that it looks like it's good with 10%. Because you can go back quite far by looking at tree ring data. And you can count the number of rings. The trees that are thousands of years old. And then to go beyond all these trees, it's more difficult, but they find pieces of wood in which the rings overlap, so they can extend it can be extended even further back. And then you can measure the carbon dating, the carbon age of those rings, and you can count the rings also. So, but that's not. Just really one thing I promise, and that's the end, because it's so interesting, it has to do with evolution. The Archaeopteryx. Anybody have a Tanakh in front of them? No?
There's one right behind
Well, someone quickly. Here's an example. Here's the Archaeopteryx. I want someone to read two verses. Where I'm talking about, please go to Leviticus chapter 11. Okay, it's the Kashrut law. You just read it last week, that's right. Okay?
Should you use the Art Scroll translation or no?
Well, no, it's good. It's transliterated. That's exactly what it's transliterated. This is a picture of the Archaeopteryx. There's about 8 of these. This one is, I think, from Asia. In the British Museum, I think I saw the one from Berlin. It's behind glass. If you're really seeing the real thing, I don't know, because you can put your head over the glass, and there this thing is there, the fossil. The glass is that thick. Now, according to National Geographic from a few years ago, though, so if you want to actually study the fossil, you have to have a character check to see if you're not some kind of crazy and going to smash it. Because I didn't bring, did I? My Rosetta Stone. Yeah. The Archaeopteryx is called I'm not here to do the dishes. Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone it's time of Ptolemy, it's 2,200 years ago, approximately, a bit under that, a few years under that. And it is 3 languages. Greek, then there's a kind of a strange language from Egypt, it's a name called, what is it, something or other, and then there's hieroglyphics. Greek, hieroglyphics, and in between I can tell you what it is. They tell me what it is here, and I don't know if it means anything to say it, but it is Dem-atik, whatever that means. Anyway, but what's important? It allowed hieroglyphics to be translated. Okay, this fossil, the Archaeopteryx, is called the Rosetta Stone of the fossil record. It is exactly half bird, half reptile. Exactly. And it says here, this is a photograph, it's life size, because that's the size that was in the British Museum also, but this is a photograph of Scientific American. The Archaeopteryx, a prehistoric bird that lived in the Jurassic period 150 million years ago, is a perfect example of a transitional form in the evolution of modern birds from reptiles. Now that's not quite true, because transitional form is usually little, that gets lost and it gets more like this, okay? This is exactly bird, exactly reptile. Bird characteristics, I don't know if you can pick it up in the machine.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Bird characteristics, feathers, it's hard, but in the fossil, this is stone. Feathered tail, feathered forelimbs, neck bent in death. You ever notice the neck of a chicken or a turkey? It's always from the muscle structure, neck bent in death, beak, and this, I think this is called the sternum, but I'm not sure. This part of the bone here, it's fused. It's not, ours is held by cartilage. The bird's, it's a solid because of the muscle structure. So that's the bird. Now forget all of that. Reptile. Under the feathers, long bony tail. Just think about, what am I describing now? I already said it. Long bony tail, claws on the hind legs, claws on the forelegs, teeth. Sounds like a lizard or something. Long bony tail. So it's exactly bird, it's exactly creepy crawly. So if you go to Leviticus, you want to use the scarf, using the art scroll, I hope, because that's what it's transliterated. So if you look at Leviticus chapter 11, chapter 11, verse 18. In the margin, it tells you what you're talking about. What is it? Can you look at the margin? It says what you're reading.
Forbidden and permissible.
What?
No, they're forbidden birds.
Forbidden birds. Can you read it, please? Verse 18.
In English or the Hebrew?
It doesn't matter. It's transliterated.
All right. The tinshemes, the kaas, the racham, the chasida, the anafa, according to its kind, the duchofis, and the top.
Okay. Just that verse. Okay. Read just the first few again.
The tinshemes, the kaas, the racham. And
Okay. Now let's jump down. That's the birds. What about verse 30? What are you looking at? Verse 30. What's in the column? What does it say you're looking at there?
There you're looking at the small creeping animals.
Creepy crow. What do you have there?
The Yanaka, the Koach, and the Leta, and the Chomet, and the Tinshemes.
What was the next word?
Tinshemes.
What was the first one, the other one?
Tinshemes.
What kind of bird? What was the animal you're talking about right now? Creepy crawlies?
Used to be a bird.
And what was it? What's the top one? Birds?
Birds.
There's one animal in the entire fossil record. We'll put it this way. There's one animal in the entire Tanakh that is listed as two categories. It's listed as a bird and as a reptile. There's one fossil in the entire fossil record that is called the Rosetta Stone. They call it right here the Rosetta Stone. It is the perfect example, not of a transitional form, of two animals in one. And that's not surprising that the Torah would describe in both ways, because you can't describe it as a bird, because it's also a reptile. And you can't describe it as a reptile, because it's also a bird. There's one animal in the Hebrew Bible that is exactly two categories, and there's one animal in the fossil record that is two categories that just happen to be in the same two categories, bird and reptile.
But why would the Torah describe it in the realm of kashrus?
Why? Well,
I mean,
for the same.
Are we coming across eating the animal anytime?
No, they disappear. These things disappear 100 million years ago.
So why would the Torah be recording that?
Why?
Why would the Torah record that for us?
Well, why would the Torah use the same word for two animals?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Though,
so when Rashi calls it, but in Rashi's time, but the scholar, what's the scholar here? Elka Weiss points out, that in Rashi's time, the Archaeopteryx wasn't known. But why the Torah would have it as two animals? Well, maybe because it feels that it's interesting to have two animals. I don't know why. Maybe it's to teach something. Why would the Torah say there was evening, there was morning, Erev and Boker, when the sun's out, makes it the fourth day? Bit of a philosophical problem, evening and morning, Erev and Boker, but there's no sun till the fourth day. Erev happens to mean superficially sunset. Anyway, so Rashi calls the Tinshemet, that's the bird, the great horned owl, up in the Galileo. And Rashi calls the Tinshemet that's around this area the chameleon. But in Rashi's day, the Archaeopteryx wasn't known, as Elke Weiss points out. And it would be not surprising that if eventually we were going to find out, well, why did Nachmanides say that the oil makes itself, and that's the way the natural world functions? You know, in other words, it's ridiculous. But somehow, I can't tell you why. What do you think? I can just tell you, I'm not in the.
Chazal give answers, but I'm saying, Chazal give answers, like you said, Rashi gives an answer.
Well, he gives two different animals.
Right.
Exactly. Well, I can tell you when it came out, the book came out in Hebrew, because the science was in Hebrew. I'm not in the hierarchy, so I don't know the rabbinic hierarchy. When everyone, they say in Boston, there are two major families, the Cabots and the Lodges. They pretty much set up the whole financial system. The Cabots speak only to the Cabots speak only to the Lodges, and the Lodges speak only to God. Okay, so there's a hierarchy in Yadut also, in the Jerusalem area. And his phone call comes in. I don't know the name, but one of my boys picked up the other extension. They say, "Do you know that?" The guy says, he's saying to me, he comes in, he goes, "It's amazing. We've always wondered about that animal. You finally solved the problem." So it's interesting. But I didn't ask him why. I should ask why. I don't know why. Except I don't know. Why would have him on kashrut? Has to have a place to put the information in. Anyway, the Archaeopteryx, the Rosetta Stone. You can have your own dish towel. Right in the museum, British Museum. Anyway, but it's pretty amazing. One animal in two categories. Not like there's a dozen, there's only one. So, arrivederci, which means in Spanish, maybe it's